Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 628. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week, Dave Nicolette, author of Software Development Metrics from Manning Publications, and I talk about pragmatically using metrics. Dave and I talk about the value teams get from measurement, regardless of the approach you are taking to deliver value. Measurement is feedback, and measurement is leadership for guiding and improving how work is done. After you've listened, I think you'll want to buy a copy of Dave's book on metrics. Use the link in the show notes. Also, yes, there is more. Always wanted to do that. You say you don't want to pay full price? Use the discount code PODSPAM20 to get a 40% discount code. By the way, that's good on all Manning products and formats. Dive in. Dave's bio. Dave started his career in information technology in 1977 as an application programmer. Since then, he has worked in a variety of roles in different industries. Currently, he works as a consultant, coach, and trainer focusing on effective software delivery methods and process improvement. Are you ready to talk software metrics? It's time for the interview. David Nicolette. Dave, author of Software Development Metrics from Manning Publications. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom.
It is always good to get somebody who can talk metrics on the cast. That almost seems to be a dying breed.
Is it?
Yeah, I hope not. I still do it. So I have no intent of dying, at least not from that. So in today's world, what makes measurement useful?
Well, I'd like to flip that question around.
Fair.
Rather than starting with a measurement and saying, how can I make you useful? I'd rather think, what's the use? What are you trying to do? And is there a measurement that can help you?
Okay.
Typically, I find that metrics are supposed to support decision making. So if we know a category of decisions that we need to make, we might be able to identify some metrics to help us make those decisions.
Okay, I buy that. Do you find that, let's say decision making, for instance, are there always metrics, whether or not you can find the data to actually create, do the measurement and get the metrics? Assuming you can find the data, is there always a way to get at the information that you need quantitatively for decision making?
Well, I would think that there may not be. It depends on the situation and what kind of a decision it is. And also, we're human, so we don't actually base our decisions purely on data. But we might want some data to help us understand the situation and make a relatively good choice or decision. My book is really aimed at people who are close to the work. Mm-hmm. So it's not about executive dashboards and long-term planning. But it's about work at the level of a team, a software team. Okay. So the kinds of decisions people need to make have to do with steering, keeping the work on track toward the goal, mm-hmm. or improving the process that the team uses to do its work.
When you're talking about steering, what's an example of steering?
Well, I'll give a couple of examples. One could be a team that's using a linear process, the popular term being waterfall. So they're doing a linear process, SDLC kind of thing. They're using metrics that are appropriate for that, like earned value management maybe. So steering in that case is a question of identifying delivery risk early. So if the project is going to be late or there's some other issue with it, going to go over cost maybe, go over budget, you want to find that out early so you have some money and time available to deal with it. So you'd use metrics for that, so you wouldn't be surprised when you suddenly run out of budget or something like that. So, oh no, what do we do? You want to be ahead of that. Another type of example could be an agile style team, an adaptive project. In that case, you don't really have everything laid out in advance, but you have a direction. You have a general capability that you're trying to give your users through the software. So steering in that case is frequent feedback from customers or users to see that what you're building aligns with what they need. And they will probably also be changing their understanding of what they need. based on what they see, the partial results that we show them to get their feedback. So together, we are guiding the software toward a good outcome. So in both of those cases, you would use appropriate metrics based on the type of process you're using. And you're just trying to make sure that you can deliver the best result you can to your customers.
What's the worst application of metrics in either one of those situations that you've seen as you've practiced?
Well, I don't know if I can isolate a worst one, but generally, if you try to measure things that are not happening, then the numbers that you're using are not meaningful. And the decisions you make are kind of random. You might get lucky, but you might also think that things are progressing in a way that they're really not. And there are examples from both of those types of processes. For instance, a lot of companies these days are doing an agile transformation. It's kind of a popular buzzword nowadays.
Amen.
So they have this idea in mind of where they would like to go. Maybe they want to implement something like Scrum or something like that. And they read about that and they learn what the metrics are. They usually go with that. So they start using those metrics. But the problem is they're not actually doing that. They're still doing what they were always doing. And they're gradually learning how to do things in a different way. But at the moment, they are measuring something that they wish was happening, not something that is happening. And so whatever numbers they come up with really don't mean anything. But they may have a false sense of confidence just because, when you see charts and graphs and numbers, it gives you comfort. But these numbers don't match up with what's really happening. And similarly, the other way around, if you're doing an adaptive style project and you're trying to manage it using metrics for a linear process, like you've got a Gantt chart or something like that, it just doesn't match what's really happening. Because imagine a Gantt chart for something like an extreme programming team. It's going to say iteration 1 starts at this date, ends at that date. Iteration 2 has a finished to start relationship with iteration 1. Okay, and so on. But there's no information there.
Right.
Right. So you can't tell if the project is going to be late because the iterations are fixed. Mm-hmm. And you can't really say if a task is going to be late because you don't define the tasks in advance. So where I've seen problems with metrics is when the metrics they're using don't align with what they're actually doing. So as long as they measure what's really happening, then they have some usable data.
What's the difference between metrics for steering and metrics for improvement? Why aren't those the same?
Well, I see them as different. What we've been talking about up until now is steering, guiding the work toward a goal. Improvement is more inward looking for the team. You could improve the organization as a whole, too, if they wanted to address that. But it's not about what you are delivering and on what date. It's about the methods you use. Are they effective? And in particular, I like to take a lean approach to that, where we distinguish between value add time and non-value add time. So you can use measurements of yourself, of your process, of the technical practices you use even, of how the communication flows between different teams and different team members, to see where the time is getting lost, to see where you're spending time on non-value add activity, and see if you can reduce that. So that would be metrics for improvement, things that look at that. They're not really looking at what are you delivering, more looking at how effectively can you move the work forward.
Is it possible for people to leverage steering metrics as improvement metrics?
Well, I think it is, particularly the lean-based metrics like throughput, cycle time, cycle efficiency. Those are very useful ones. Those are the main ones I like to use, in fact. You can use those for both. Cycle time can be charted out in various different ways, and you can see different things about the process as well as the delivery performance by charting that out in different ways. They're very useful and very simple, which I like.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of simple But I agree with you that things like cycle time and perhaps throughput can be extremely powerful in terms of, despite the fact that they're simple. Simplicity and power are usually not related or sort of exactly the opposite, right? Something very simple tends to be not very powerful, but those have a bunch of information that one can extract out of them. In your opinion, productivity or predictability? If you were going to tune a team for one of those, couldn't have both, let's say, sort of like my greasy spoon down the street. I can have it fast or I can have it semi more edible than it already is. It's a fun place. Yeah, just take your Pepto with you. Which one and why?
Okay. I think if I had to pick one of those, I would probably go with predictability. Because the software team is probably one of many in an organization. And it's doing only a small part of the work that organization does. And in order to plan, I said this book is not about large-scale planning, but in order to do that large-scale planning, you have to have some idea of what the teams can do, what their capacity is. And if their capacity is highly variable, it's very difficult to predict that. Like I could ask your team, well, how long would it take to do this amount of work? And you could say, well, it could be anywhere from 2 days to a year. That's not useful. So helping a team...
Might be accurate, though.
It may be very accurate, yes. But helping a team narrow that band down a little bit, maybe down to where they could say, well, it could be a month, it could be 3 months. Okay, well, I can work with that. But not 2 days versus a year. That's just it's not predictable. You don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
A second point, and this is probably just a personal thing of mine, I'm not a big fan of the word productivity. And that's because, to me, it means what the dictionary says, output over input. So you can generate more output in a month than you could last year. So what? What is that output? Does anybody want it? Is it useful? Or are you just generating stuff? So I prefer to think about value and effectiveness rather than productivity.
How would you measure value? Value is one of those ethereal things. Matter of fact, if I look over my bookshelf, and I actually do have books on them, paper books, maybe a little too old school. I've got a couple on value, and they both disagree with each other. I mean, I would love to measure value. I would especially at a team level. That's sometimes a lot more ethereal than it really should be.
It is, yeah. Yeah, that's, I also mentioned the word effectiveness, which you can kind of nail down better. But value can be subjective, but really, you don't know the value of a software product, or maybe any product, until somebody pays for it. And they're telling you what the value is by the amount of money they're willing to pay. Mm-hmm. But this doesn't help you when you're in the middle of development. So we have to have a proxy for value. And, for a linear process, say we mentioned earned value management, the budget is kind of the proxy for value. You hear people who use this method talking about value, and what they really mean is the budgeted cost of a work package. Well, we don't know if that's the same as what a customer would pay, but we use it as a yardstick to judge the value of each work package. Same kind of thing with an Agile type process. You have an idea of the next feature that you would like to build, and you have the voice of the customer somehow in your team as a product owner or as a business analyst or a manager or somebody who can make a judgment about which features are more valuable than others. And we understand that this is their judgment of what the anticipated value is, or maybe it's just the relative value between A and B. But we don't really have a hard number because that only comes when it's in the market.
Yeah, and if you're an internal software team, doing patches and enhancements to SAP, you're never going to see a customer buy that. If inside, right? That's you're there living slightly off the normal value chain.
You are, but when I'm working with teams like that, they question their ability to judge the value of a work item that they have. See, maybe they have to do a little refactoring or change the architecture of a system, and they say, well, there's no customer value in this. And so what I'll ask them to do is just reason through it and think, what's the impact of having the bad architecture? Well, the impact is it takes longer to deliver anything to the customers. It's probably not going to work very well. It may introduce performance issues or something that affect the customer. Mm-hmm. So the value of keeping that architecture up to date and working well is that your customers don't get fed up with your product and go to a competitor. And that's pretty good value. It's just not a direct thing that they would pay for or think about, probably.
That's fair. Probably would have, back in the late 90s, probably kept a number of teams from being outsourced if they had gone down that mental path. Why'd you write this book for basically team level versus writing a measurement and metrics book for executives?
Well, the main reason is that that's where I saw most of the problems. Well, executives can pick some metrics that they want to see on their dashboard, and they ask their teams to provide that. But what does that mean to the teams? I mean, it may seem to them to be arbitrary and not something that helps them. And in the meantime, I see project managers and team leads and other people on that level really not understanding what's happening with the workflow and not understanding how their teams are working. And they try to use whatever metrics they read about online, and it's like they're shooting in the dark. So I thought that there was a need for people to understand the purpose of measuring things at that level and which measurements fit with which process models so that they weren't measuring wrong things, as we talked about before.
True.
Because I saw a need for that. And I have to tell you that I'm not a metrics nerd. It's not something that's super interesting for me, but it is necessary. And if you do it wrong, you're going to have false readings of what's going on. So you'll make the wrong decisions. So it's a necessary thing. So I like to keep it simple, sort of a minimalist, and make sure that every stakeholder has the information they need at the right times, at the right level of detail to make their decisions. And I know there are some people who just love the numbers and they love the charts and the colorful graphs and things. And if a tool gives them 500 different measurements, they'll use them all. But that's not me. So my motivation really was to help people at the team level really control their work and understand how they can tell whether they are improving their work when they change things. For instance, if a team decided to try pair programming, well, is that really helping them or not? And if you just let it ride, the Hawthorne effect kicks in and they think, well, this is different and people are paying attention to us, so it's better.
It must be good. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But what if you actually measure how well the work is flowing and say, okay, it's flowing a little better. What accounts for that? And they can continue to analyze that and maybe make further improvements.
The idea of writing a book, especially a book that you didn't wake up and go, oh my God, metrics are, I'm going to have metrics tattooed all over my body. By the way, if you ever go down that path, I've got a son-in-law here in Cleveland. We could fix you right up. But what got you there? How did it change you as an author of a book? Are you a different person now that you wrote the book?
I don't know that I'm really very different because the motivation was pragmatic. And actually, the original working title had pragmatic metrics in it, part of the title, because I wanted it to be useful. Everything is about getting the work done, getting it done effectively without a lot of stress, not making a lot of mistakes and creating defects. This is all part of work for me. And this just seemed like a gap that needed to be filled. Now, of course, whenever you write a book, you learn a lot about the topic. And it's more of a learning exercise for you than you spewing out your wisdom or something like that. Because I didn't start out with wisdom about it. I started out by recognizing a problem and trying to solve it. But it didn't change me too much in that respect because I still am pragmatic and I still try to solve problems. And I didn't fall in love with metrics by learning about them, but I still understand that they're useful and necessary.
Yeah. Why'd you lose the word pragmatic in the title?
But the editor didn't think it was snappy enough, I guess. For me, it was a contrast with what I saw in my work, was that people were not being very pragmatic about it. You know, they were measuring a lot of things that didn't help them and spending a lot of effort on that. And they weren't focused in on exactly what they needed. So to me, I think of it as pragmatic.
Has this book changed how either you work with projects, or have you observed people using your ideas and actually delivering more value?
I have observed that. I wouldn't say, a million cases of it, because it's not really a big thing. It's not like a Stephen King novel or something with millions of readers. There was a college professor who contacted me and said he was using it as a textbook, which was interesting, because this was really a work-oriented, practical book. So I thought that was kind of interesting that he chose that.
That is always fun. I must say, though, that the Manning editors who came up with the title did actually a good job. And my book on project management has my co-author and I ended up with the title that and subtitle that go on for about 40,000 words to get every buzzword in the face of the earth in it. And I think that's so that it Googles well, I guess. I don't know. But
yeah, probably.
What's the name of your book? God, I can't remember. And so I think they did a good job. Dave, if you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice, a magic wand, and said that you had 2 wishes, that you could change any 2 things affecting measurement, what would those 2 things be and why?
I think probably things that we've already mentioned today. One of them is that I would want people to really think about what they need to measure and why, and not just randomly throw metrics at their work. So there would be that. And I would hope that the people who are enamored of charts and graphs would think about minimizing the metrics rather than maximizing them. Because, you end up with a lot of noise. I saw a slide that had a pie chart and a bar chart and a line chart of the same data, all in one slide, and it was all multicolored. Very pretty, but it was difficult to make any sense of it. So, I would hope that people would rein in their enthusiasm a little bit about the graphs and charts so that people can actually understand what they're looking at.
I'm colorblind, so the colorful charts usually cause me great angst anyway, as I try to figure out which one's red, which one's green, which one's blue, and all that kind of stuff as people talk about it. I mean, there is, I don't know, maybe they teach people that, but there is a sort of a generic decision that more stuff on a page, more graphs on a page clarifies issues. And I've never quite understood why that works. In conversations after the fact, almost everybody's confused, even the people who put them together as to what they really said. Oh, well, it is a problem. I agree. I hope you get your magic wand.
Well, I hope so too. Yeah, I think that generally, this is a very broad statement, but some people are very visual and others are more numbers or data oriented. So if you could present the data on 2 different slides or 2 different pages, but one that's maybe columnar or like a spreadsheet and another that's a graphic, then you've covered most of the bases. Most people will be able to pick one of those and understand it. But combining a lot of different formats in one presentation is just confusing.
Agreed. Dave Nicolette, author of Software Development Metrics. By the way, when the word pragmatic was in there, what was the actual working title?
What was it? I think it was just something like Pragmatic Software Development Metrics.
I think I do like the shorter title better. Software Development Metrics from Manning. This has been marvelous, and I enjoy talking metrics with somebody who actually understands, and I've read a good chunk of the book. I have not read it all yet. I'm still working on it. I bought myself a copy from Manning.
Well, it's not a novel, I would think if you were on a team and you said, well, we're using we're using a Scrum. So which of these pertain to us? And look in the index and say, well, this pertains to us. This doesn't. No need to read the whole thing.
Well, that's good advice in terms of using it. How can people continue the conversation?
Well, I think if they can continue to think about what is practical for them, what is useful. Don't waste time playing around with things that don't help you get your work done.
You provided the listeners a great deal of information, some good things to think about. Obviously, we'd love them to run off and buy the book. So we've already promoted that. Is there anything else that you would like to promote? The platform's yours, Dave.
Well, I don't know what to promote, really. I do technical work. I do technical coaching. And metrics is really not the main thing I do. It's part of what I do. So if someone wants help getting their teams to be more effective with software delivery, software support, then I can help them.
When you say technical consulting, what does technical consulting include?
Well, this is like if I'm working with a team, as I am now with a client, and they're having trouble, say, with testing. So we'll try to figure out what's the source of that problem. And in many cases, it'll be something like they don't control their test environment, or they can't create their own test data, or they don't understand how to write test automation, something like that. So I'll help them with those things.
Super.
Or if it's a team that delivers software and the delivery is always a hassle and they have a lot of problems whenever they deploy, we can work on that. There are tools and methods for streamlining that, making it more reliable and not so error prone. So I help them with that. If it's programmers, there's software engineering principles that you can apply. There's techniques like test-driven development that you can apply. So I help them with that.
Super. That's fantastic. Dave, this has been marvelous. Thank you for spending the time and sharing with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Well, thanks a lot.
In Reread Saturday News, this week we head into Chapter 1 of Great Big Agile, an OS for Agile Leaders by Jeff Dalton. In many organizations, there is a disconnect between the real culture and the stated culture, which is one of the leading reasons organizational change fails. The mind shift of becoming agile exposes gaps between the real and aspirational culture that, if not addressed, cause pain as long as the institutional memory exists. Remember to buy a copy, link in the show notes. Links in the show notes also to this week and last week's installments of the Reread. Next week, we're staying with the metrics theme and Manning Publications for a chat with Christopher W.H. Davis. There's a story on the WH thing, by the way. Author of Agile Metrics in Action, How to Measure and Improve Team Performance. Combining metrics and Agile is not an oxymoron. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?